Everybody, I think it's just a smidge after 8 o'clock, and I think most people are here, so we'll go ahead and get started and go from there. We have a packed schedule, so I want to make sure that we stay on time and get you guys out of here a little bit on time today. So our first speaker is Joe Miller. He's the Associate Clinical Professor of Emergency Medicine and Internal Medicine at Wayne State in Henry Ford. He has clinical training as well as a Master's of Science from the University of Michigan's School of Public Health. He's involved in several clinical research trials, and today he's going to lead us off on a workshop talking about the types of grants and granting agencies that are out there. So I will have him start us off.
All right, good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming this early. So we'll start off with a relatively light presentation as you enjoy breakfast. And I want to especially welcome all the people that participated in ARMED this year. Thank you for your participation, and also I would encourage anyone that did not do ARMED and is interested for this next year. We are taking applications for the ARMED course for the next academic year, and I believe they're due in July. So with that, main objective of this is simply going to go over a broad overview of kind of what funding is out there for all of you to consider that's relevant to emergency medicine. Now, this is not exhaustive. It would take us a long time to go through every single opportunity, but at least to give a broad overview of the kind of things that emergency medicine researchers are getting funded for and what institutions are funding them. Now, just a show of hands, did anyone win any big winnings for their research career yesterday on the floors? Any casino winnings? All right, well, and I wouldn't recommend, gambling to help your research careers. And I think sometimes people feel like trying to get funding from the NIH or funding from, various foundations and whatnot is almost like gambling, or the odds are like gambling. Fortunately, though, it does work out with persistence and good science, whereas gambling, you eventually are going to lose to the house. Now, one of the first places I'd recommend finding funding, where I first was fortunate to get funding, is actually just looking at home. And amazingly, when I started as faculty at my institution, I was not aware for the first probably 12 to 24 months that there was internal funding opportunities. They all went through these secret emails that only go to like certain people in the institution. So one of the first places to look is to check with your own institution, talk to researchers in the institution, and see what's available. So there's a good chance that particularly larger institutions, you'll have some kind of pilot award funding. For instance, at our place, which is not a large university institution, there are non-competitive $10,000 pilot grants that are available for faculty, which a lot of people aren't aware of. And so non-competitive means that as long as someone reviews it and thinks it's reasonable, you'll get $10,000 to help with your pilot funding. You may have career development awards, and so our institution had a kind of a 3-year internal K award, and so I applied for that, didn't get it the first time, but then on the subsequent application was able to fix things quite a bit, improve the mentorship plan, and got funding through an internal K award. And so you may have those kind of opportunities as well. Dr. VanEpps is at Michigan. Michigan has their own website where they advertise opportunities for pilot funding and other faculty staff awards that are within the institution. They also have your institution may also have ties to foundations that are only funding people within your institution as well. So for instance, Michigan has some ties to like a Massey Foundation for TBI research and other opportunities. Now, I know that some of you have already applied for these, and hopefully with the specific AIM pages you're working on, you're going to be applying for these coming later this summer or into next year. So some of the great opportunities for early investigators within emergency medicine are through the SAEM Foundation and also the Emergency Medicine Foundation. Interestingly, if you Google SAEM Foundation, there's actually a makeup company that has a foundation labeled SAEM. So don't go to that for your opportunities for funding. But these are great ways to get pilot awards, 2-year career development awards. There's a mid-career award now through SAEM, and a great way to get funding for educational research. So the deadline for SAEM Foundation is August 1st. So AIMS pages that many of you have worked on, you're in great shape to develop those potential proposals for an August 1st submission. And then those get reviewed in October. So these are the current people that are being funded by SAEM Foundation. Dr. Pedigo has an educational grant for $100,000. Dr. Samuel Francis is doing work on platelet activity and D-dimers and has essentially a mentor training award. Dr. Grenadier at Michigan has a large project award. Dr. Melissa Joseph is doing educational simulation research and has an award for that, as well as Dr. Cade at Wayne State, who also has an educational research award. So wonderful opportunities for you all to apply for this coming year. Beyond emergency medicine specific foundations, there are a large host of foundations that many of you are probably aware of, but you may not be aware that a lot of these foundations have annual or even more frequent cycles of funding that they offer. So particularly American Heart Association has national and regional awards that are available to emergency physicians. Many emergency physicians have received funding, particularly early investigator type funding through AHA. Obviously that would largely be for cardiovascular disease and stroke. And then many other foundations such as Robert Wood Johnson are funding emergency medicine researchers. A great example of kind of more local foundations is Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan. I know has funded many emergency physicians in the state of Michigan to do small projects, either $10,000 grants or $60,000 grants. And those grants, although competitive, are much less competitive than trying to go for your first NIH award. And so many of my colleagues have received initial funding through those types of foundations. The applications are often also relatively easy, whereas an NIH R01 application may total over 100 pages for the entire application assembly. Some of these foundation applications could be 2, 3, 4 pages, depending on the type of funder. Another one that some emergency medicine researchers recently have received funding, and many in the past too, is there are also foundations that have nothing to do with healthcare, but then decide to get into healthcare. So one example is anyone participating in the Victus trial at their site? At least a couple of you. I know we're a site for it. So the Victus trial is a trial that's testing this cocktail of vitamin C and hydrocortisone and thiamine for sepsis. And it was actually funded through the Marcus Foundation, which is not a healthcare foundation, but was interested in delving into healthcare. And it was actually started by one of the founders of Home Depot as a profitable way to give some of those billions back to society. And then Dr. David Wright, who's at Emory, is one of the PIs for that, as well as Dr. Savransky, who's a critical care guy. So foundations are out there. There's lots of opportunities there. This is not an exhaustive list. Your institution may have lists to help you with finding these foundations. I know we have an email list of foundation grants that goes out approximately monthly, maybe bi-monthly. There's a good chance that your institution may have that, even if you're not getting it now. Someone is creating that list. I'll mention later that there is some web-related resources out there, such as Pivot, that help you get feeds of grants, including foundation grants. All right, another big area where a lot of emergency researchers do end up getting some funding is through industry. Now, I'm not referring to just participating as a site for a multi-center industry-funded study, but investigator-initiated research that has partnerships with industry. So this can be through you having an idea that's relevant to an industry partner, and you work with a company to get funding to fund your idea. Now, these can be less formal. They can have very little competition, particularly if you're the one going to the company and working with partners there. Sometimes there is competition if they actually create a request for applications in a particular area, and you may be competing with a small number of other investigators. And some people develop long-term partnerships with industry that help support future NIH work or supports advancing a particular area of science. One example would be many emergency physicians have partnered closely with Zoll, for instance, to develop a lot of resuscitation science research. And so some of that has led to future NIH funding, and some of it has also led to developments within the company. So particularly if you have an interest in something that's very device-driven or driven by new pharmaceutical agents or whatnot, it may be a reasonable place to go. An example is Frank Peacock at Baylor recently worked with a company called ZS Pharma that was eventually bought by AstraZeneca. They had a drug that lowers potassium that they were marketing to that they were developing for cardiology practices, and he said, well, this would make a lot of sense to use in emergency medicine, so worked with the company to develop a proposal to do a trial of the drug for emergency medicine, and that's just coming to completion. Another example, while technically a foundation, the Focus Foundation is funded by Gilead, and I suspect some of you have colleagues that are working with funding through this agency, and they allow investigator-initiated awards to work on hepatitis C and HIV linkage to care, particularly in emergency medicine, underserved populations. So I know our center, for instance, has one of these awards to do this kind of work. So you can find these both through industry contacts that you or your colleagues may have, and many websites for industry research will have links to where you can reach out to companies to propose your study ideas. The one caveat I would say is, and this is somewhat a warning to myself as much as to all of you, is that often when you're working with industry to work on research, it's a value proposition for the company and a balance between that value proposition and the actual science. And so ultimately, to do the science you really want to do, sometimes working with industry can be as much a distraction as it is to really advance the science that you want to do. So ultimately, the place where you're going to get the most bang for your buck for advancing the science that you want to do without ties to industry and without ties to bowing to other people is to work with NIH. And so the NIH has 27 institutes and centers. Dr. Brown's going to go into a little bit more detail soon with you on working with the NIH. And these are just a few of the institutes that particularly have funded a fair amount of emergency medicine research, such as NINDS, NHLBI, et cetera. And the NIH is where the most money is. So billions of dollars are given by the NIH for research throughout the country, and it was rising steadily up to the early 2000s, and then it certainly has leveled off. This graph shows adjusted to purchasing power, has leveled off, and the number of applications has increased, but the reason I show this just came, I think, this last week out from the NIH, that bottom graph, bottom line there is the proportion of awardees has started to tick up a little bit. So while it was flat for a long time, there is a tick up in the number of awardees from the NIH. These are a few of the people that are currently funded by the NIH for large research projects. This is just a small number of them, but potentially people that you all can think of to reach out to if their science matches what you're interested in, particularly if you're looking at future career development awards and potential remote mentors and people that can help tie you in to the kind of science and review that you'll need to submit to the NIH. Dr. Beer at Michigan is doing cardiac arrest research. Ben Sun's doing work on ACS. Esther Chu's doing some work on changes in opiate laws in Oregon. Dr. Serta, I believe, is doing work on cannabinoids and substance abuse. Manish Shah is doing some work on aging and EMS. Jeff Caterino at Ohio State is doing work on urinary UTIs in elderly patients and immune response. Opway at Cincinnati just got a large grant through the StrokeNet to do a randomized trial of eptifibatide plus or minus TPA. Nina Gentile is at Temple and has done some work on biomarkers and stroke. And there are many, many other researchers out there to reach out to. I'll mention it later, but one great resource to finding people certainly is through the just regular connections you have through SAEM and connections in this room, but also through NIH Reporter, which I'll mention later. There's easy ways that you can search and find out who in emergency medicine is getting funding for trials. NIH also has training grants, which is great places for you all to start thinking about opportunities for you to push your career forward, particularly if you're just finishing your residency fellowship. There are opportunities for T32 programs. Mount Sinai, for instance, has a T32 program for fellows. And there are a number of K-12 programs, including a K-12 program at Michigan, Vanderbilt, OHSU, and others that are focused on emergency research. And then a great way for you all to potentially start your research careers is to really get K Award funding, which allows you to have a significant amount of protected time to do the research you want to do and some additional research support. In these last 3 to 5 years, Dr. VanEpps has funding for a K08 award. K23 is centered on patient-oriented research, whereas K08 is Clinician Scientist Award and more focused on preclinical. The beauty is the success rates for K Awards are actually pretty good. Better than, in some instances, better than the craps tables downstairs. In many instances, much better. And so, this is, I believe, from 2018, a lot of the institutes that fund emergency medicine had K Award awardee rates over 25, 30%, and sometimes up to 50% or greater. So pretty decent odds. And this is just a breakdown of the R awards through the NIH, the major ones. The R01 is really kind of the major award that allows you to do significant research in your area. And then some of these are smaller or focused on planning awards. Kind of went through that already. So where do you find these? So the NIH has a vast website, and there's also a great feed that you can obtain through weekly feeds from the NIH for opportunities. You can also reach out to Dr. Brown from the Office of Emergency Care Research and many of your colleagues at your institutions. So jumping from the NIH to a couple other federally funded opportunities. One is Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, or AHRQ. There are a number of emergency medicine researchers that are currently funded through this. AHRQ largely does health services research, and it's not part of the NIH, but it does share a lot of the same kind of terminology and mechanisms for applications. So you apply through the same web system, and they also have K training awards as well as R series awards. And if anyone is interested, there is a didactic Thursday morning that's going to include several of the people listed on this slide who will talk about their experience working on AHRQ funding and deciding between whether to go to the NIH or AHRQ for their projects. I also mentioned DoD. Dr. VanEpps mentioned that he has some funding through DoD. There are a number of emergency physicians that have funding through DoD. And now, obviously, a lot of DoD funding is going to be geared toward things that could be translated to combat medicine. However, the DoD is interested in the health of all their veterans, and so there are opportunities in many different areas, including things like focuses on cancer research, focuses on lupus, et cetera, that the DoD has identified as priorities. These are just a few examples. Now, John Holcomb's not an emergency physician, but his research spans into the world of trauma and emergency medicine, so he has funding to do a next-generation REBOA. Mohamed Tiba, that works at University of Michigan, is in the emergency department, has DoD funding to look at non-invasive cerebrovascular monitoring. Norm Paradis at Dartmouth has funding to look at a multiplex system for early warnings of shock. And so a few examples of emergency physicians that are doing work with the DoD. So particularly if you have interest in shock, traumatic brain injury, the DoD is a right place to look. And then if anyone is part of the armed services, there are intramural opportunities as well through the DoD. Last, I'll mention Patient-Centered Outcome Research Institute, or PCORI. This was started in 2010 as a way to fund research that was patient-centered and funding questions that are of interest to patient outcomes. And so a number of people, including Zach Mizell from Penn, Ben Abella, Eric Hess, and Donna Cardin, have all received funding through PCORI. These are all emergency researchers. And PCORI has ongoing announcements on their opportunities for research, whether it be on methodology or whether it be on comparative effectiveness research. There are many opportunities that they list through their website and online email feeds that you can all subscribe to. So just a few resources that I mentioned briefly. One is NIH Matchmaker is a nice way that you can put in your area of research, maybe an abstract of an article you've written in your area, put it in, and it will help search the entire NIH repository for people that have been funded in your area. So you can find out, I'm interested in ultrasound research of a nerve sheath, put that in and find out, has anyone received funding in there, and where you can contact those people, or contact the program officers at NIH that have been involved in those projects. NIH Reporters, similarly, you can find out who's been funded in particular areas. Many of your institutions may subscribe to Pivot or other grant funding lists that'll help you find projects. And lastly, I'll just mention another opportunity. While not funding for your research, if any of you are interested in getting funding for you, the NIH Loan Repayment Program is a great thing to start looking into now while you're earlier in your career to figure out ways that you can get some of your loans paid off. Because let's be honest, many of you are going down academic careers that have sacrificed some of the potential financial benefit you get from working in pure community emergency medicine. And so the NIH does have availability to pay off $70,000 or more of your student loans if you qualify for the loan repayment program. So something to start looking into. There are specific qualification requirements, but I would start looking now so you can plan ahead for the future. So with that, I think, do we have time for a few questions? So we can sort of take some questions now, but we'll have, a lot of this is going to be a workshop, and we'll have lots of time throughout the morning and early afternoon to talk about what kind of opportunities we've covered here could fit with what you all are working on specifically, one-on-one. Great, thank you.
Yeah, if I can just echo a little bit of what sort of Joe put up there, is that getting funding is a lot like sort of your investment portfolio. Keep it diverse, and there are lots of places to look and try from different angles. I'm a poster child for that. I have sort of explored all options in those categories that he talked about. And so there are many ways to skin this cat, and don't feel like you're pigeonholed into only going to the NIH or to governmental, but foundation. They all use the same concepts for grant writing, little nuances, but what you learn here to sell your story is going to be important for all of those. Definitely keep your eyes open for opportunities.